The courtroom was tense, every seat filled, every eye glued to the center of the room. Ethan Harper, 32, sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, his hands folded neatly in front of him. And then, he smiled. Not the nervous smile of someone facing serious charges. Not the confused, guilty grin of someone overwhelmed by the weight of the law. This was different, deliberate, slow, almost daring. A smile that froze the room in disbelief. Reporters lowered their cameras for a brief moment, unsure whether they were witnessing a man's composure or something far darker. The judge, a veteran of 25 years on the bench, paused mid-step, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at Ethan. In all his years, he had seen hardened criminals, desperate pleas, and even the most calculated frauds, but nothing like this. The victim's family sat in the gallery, their expressions taut with pain and confusion. Some clutched tissues in trembling hands, others stared in silent horror. How could someone smile at a moment when so many lives had been shattered? Ethan's girlfriend, Claire, sat among a few close friends, her hand gripping her purse tightly. She had known him for years, or at least, she thought she had. That smile made her stomach turn. What is he thinking? What is he planning? The murmurs grew, whispers darting through the room like a cold draft. The press scribbled furiously in notebooks, cameras zoomed closer, and every person in that courtroom felt it, the unnatural calm of a man whose actions seemed to defy logic, morality, and expectation. And then the judge cleared his throat. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on Ethan as the first words of the trial were about to be spoken. He didn't flinch. He didn't look down. His gaze was steady, almost playful. A small flicker of amusement danced in his dark eyes. This smile, it wasn't just unsettling. It was a challenge. A puzzle. A question with no obvious answer. Why would a man facing severe charges remain so composed? Here's the question you need to ask yourself if you were in that courtroom, watching someone smile while the law itself seemed to pause for him. What would you do? What would you think? And more importantly, why was he smiling at all? That's the mystery we're about to explore. Every detail, every secret, every twist that led to that grin will be revealed, but not yet. Because some truths are meant to slowly unravel, layer by layer. Before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe to the channel, help us grow this channel to its first 100 subscribers and comment where you're watching from, because this story isn't just shocking, it's one you'll want to share with friends, family, and anyone who loves a mystery that keeps you on the edge of your seat. And now, let's go back to the quiet streets of Vancouver where this story began, where ordinary life hid something far from ordinary. Something that would eventually lead to that chilling smile in the courtroom. Maplewood Drive was the kind of street that seemed pulled straight from a postcard. Neatly trimmed lawns stretched like carpets of green, each home painted in soft, inviting colors. Children's bicycles leaned against fences, and dogs lazily trotted along sidewalks as neighbors waved to one another. It was peaceful, calm, ordinary. At first glance, Ethan Harper's home fit right in. A modest two-story house, painted soft gray with white trim, an immaculate garden in front, and a small, welcoming porch where he sometimes sipped coffee in the morning sun. From the outside, there was nothing unusual. It was a house of quiet suburban normalcy. But appearances, as Ethan knew, were a powerful thing. They masked what lay beneath. Behind the curtains, behind the carefully arranged furniture, something darker stirred. Something deliberate. Something that no passerby could ever imagine. Neighbors recalled small, odd behaviors, almost dismissible at first. The late-night glow of a lamp in the second-floor study, hours after everyone had gone to bed. The faint sound of tapping, rhythmic and constant, coming from within the walls, as if someone was keeping time with an unseen beat. Shadows moved past frosted windows at times when Ethan should have been asleep. Mrs. Lavigne, who lived directly across the street, noticed him on a quiet Tuesday night. Ethan was on the balcony, staring into the darkness with a stillness that made her spine tingle. She waved, thinking he might smile or nod politely. He didn't respond. His expression was fixed, almost calculating. Something about it felt wrong, but at the time, she could only shrug it off. Perhaps he's deep in thought, she told herself. Other neighbors shared similar stories. Mr. Chen, who prided himself on being observant, had noticed a small series of scratches on the driveway, almost like someone had tested the ground for traction. He thought little of it, until he saw Ethan standing perfectly still in the kitchen window late one evening, the only light in the room coming from a single overhead lamp. Even the mail carrier began to feel uneasy. Letters left in the mailbox were sometimes missing the next morning, and although Ethan collected them himself, he did so in a way that seemed rehearsed, deliberate. Neighbors began to whisper quietly among themselves, but without any proof, no one could question him. It was this contrast between the ordinary and the unsettling that made Maplewood Drive the perfect hiding place. The street seemed calm, predictable, almost safe, yet inside that home, a story was unfolding that no one could have foreseen. And then, one evening, the whispers escalated into real alarm. A faint sound of shuffling and muttered words leaked from the Harper home, drifting into the quiet street. A light flickered repeatedly upstairs, and for a brief moment, the shadow of a figure appeared in the window. Not moving casually, not walking, standing, watching, calculating. Mrs. Lavigne whispered to her husband, her voice barely audible, "Do you see that? Something isn't right." But even as the neighbors strained to understand what they were seeing, Ethan remained inside, motionless, the faintest smile crossing his face. A smile no one outside could understand, a smile that hinted at secrets lurking behind closed doors. What was he doing? Why was he standing there, in the dead of night, so calm while everyone else slept? And more importantly, what would happen next? That night, Maplewood Drive went quiet again. But for those few brief moments, the street had witnessed the first signs of something that would shock the entire city and eventually, the entire country. If you're wondering what exactly Ethan was planning, what he was thinking, and how a man like this could hide so much behind an ordinary facade, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a comment with where you're watching from, and share this video, because the story is only about to get darker. By day, Ethan Harper looked like the embodiment of success. At Maplewood Financial Group in downtown Vancouver, he was known as sharp, methodical, and endlessly composed. Colleagues often described him as the guy who could solve a complex financial problem in minutes while maintaining an effortless smile. He was polite, reliable, and seemingly unflappable, the kind of professional every company wanted on their team. After work, he met his girlfriend, Claire Thompson, at a trendy cafe near Granville Street. Claire, a marketing consultant, often laughed about how Ethan could analyze the most mundane details, even how many drops of sugar she put in her coffee, yet somehow make her feel like she was in on some clever, inside joke. Friends admired them as a couple, balanced, accomplished, and enviably stable. Ethan's social life was active but carefully curated. On weekends, he went for jogs along Stanley Park seawall, sometimes stopping to chat with neighbors he had grown friendly with over the years. Evenings often involved quiet dinners with Claire, friends from work, or occasional visits to local theaters. Every gesture, every interaction, painted the picture of a man grounded, trustworthy, and entirely ordinary. And yet, appearances, as we will see, can be deceiving. Behind the polished smile and calm demeanor, Ethan harbored a mind that worked in patterns no one else could see. He took meticulous notes in leather-bound journals, cataloging his observations, interactions, and plans with almost obsessive precision. Friends who glimpsed these notebooks described them as eccentric but harmless, little realizing how critical they would later become to investigators. Claire often noticed subtle things she couldn't explain. A certain intensity in Ethan's gaze when he was alone in thought. The way he sometimes seemed lost in calculation during their conversations. Or the quiet moments when he would stare at the ceiling late at night, tapping his fingers as if counting invisible beats. She dismissed these quirks at first. Everyone had habits, right? But slowly, unease began to creep in. Neighbors, too, saw only fragments. A fleeting shadow behind the curtains, the faint hum of activity in the house when it should have been quiet, the occasional sound of someone pacing upstairs. Ordinary signs for someone looking from the outside, but to those who would later investigate, these small observations would form a puzzle that hinted at the extraordinary and terrifying truth. Ethan's life was like a perfectly arranged stage. Every element in place. Every role meticulously performed. To anyone who glanced in, he was a man at peace with himself and the world. But appearances, as the saying goes, are deceptive. For behind the polished surface was a mind capable of cold, calculated choices, decisions that would soon shatter the calm of Maplewood Drive forever. What could drive a man who seemed so ordinary, so relatable, so controlled? To cross the line between the world we know and something far darker? What secret lies hidden behind that smile, the same smile that stunned the courtroom? If you're curious to uncover the secrets behind Ethan Harper's perfect life, subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below where you're watching from, because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew. Life on Maplewood Drive seemed normal, almost idyllic, but cracks were beginning to appear, small, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. It started with the neighbors. Mrs. Lavigne, who prided herself on being observant, noticed Ethan pacing silently on his balcony late at night. He didn't wave when she said hello, didn't even acknowledge her presence. Just stood there, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the streetlights. Then there was Mr. Chen, a retired engineer who lived across the street. He had always noticed patterns in people, a skill honed from decades of solving technical problems. And Ethan's patterns were unusual. The man would leave the house at odd hours, not for work or errands, but to walk the quiet streets, often returning hours later with nothing in hand. Mr. Chen had even spotted Ethan peering into neighbors' windows, though he never lingered long enough to be caught outright. Even co-workers at the financial firm began noticing little oddities. Mark Sinclair, Ethan's longtime friend and colleague, remembered the first time something seemed off. Ethan had spent hours meticulously reviewing a spreadsheet, but when Mark glanced at the screen, it contained nothing but repetitive numbers, patterns that made no sense in their work. It's obsessive, maybe eccentric, Mark had thought, shrugging it off. But in hindsight, it was the beginning of a pattern. A mind focused not just on work, but on control, observation, and planning. And then there were the journals. Ethan's journals, bound in dark leather, filled the shelves of his home office. Claire had glimpsed them once and joked about his secret diary. But there was nothing trivial about these entries. They were methodical, almost clinical, documenting daily routines, minor interactions, and even fleeting thoughts of people he encountered. At first glance, it seemed harmless. But the precision, the obsession, hinted at a mind constantly analyzing, calculating, anticipating. Then came the nights. Strange noises would ripple through the Harper home, tapping, pacing, whispered mutterings. Sometimes, neighbors reported seeing lights flicker in unusual patterns, a single lamp turning on and off repeatedly, as if signaling someone, or counting something invisible. Small, isolated incidents, nothing anyone could report. Yet when pieced together, they began to suggest an underlying tension building beneath the surface. Claire tried to rationalize it. Maybe he's stressed from work, she told herself. Friends insisted Ethan was just a little intense. But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of everyone's perception. And then, a particularly strange event occurred. Mrs. Lavigne, unable to sleep, looked out her bedroom window one night and saw Ethan standing at his living room window, completely still. His gaze was unwavering, almost predatory, and then, as if he noticed her staring, he turned slowly and smiled. Not a friendly smile, the same unsettling smile that would later shock the courtroom. The question began to form in the minds of anyone paying attention: could these small, seemingly insignificant signs hint at something far more dangerous? What exactly was Ethan planning in the shadows of his ordinary life? Was this smile just an eerie quirk? Or a glimpse of the cold, calculated mind beneath? The evening began like any other in Ethan Harper's carefully curated life. It was a crisp autumn night in Vancouver, the city lights reflecting softly off the wet streets after a light drizzle. Inside his Maplewood Drive home, the smell of roasted chicken and fresh herbs filled the kitchen. The table was set neatly, for plates, crystal glasses, and polished cutlery arranged with meticulous care. Ethan had invited his girlfriend, Claire, and 2 colleagues from work for a casual dinner. Laughter punctuated the air as they shared stories from the office, jokes about commuting chaos, and friendly debates over sports and current events. To anyone observing, it was the picture of normalcy. Warmth, comfort, and routine. But subtle irregularities crept beneath the surface. Ethan's movements were precise, almost ritualistic. He tapped his fingers on the edge of the table, not to the rhythm of conversation, but in a pattern only he understood. He checked the locks on the front and back doors repeatedly, even though the neighborhood was quiet and safe. Occasionally, his gaze darted toward the windows as if measuring something outside. Claire noticed these behaviors but brushed them off. He's just anxious tonight, she told herself. It's nothing. She smiled politely at the conversation, but her eyes flicked to him, sensing something different in his energy. The colleagues chatted about mundane topics, stock market trends, weekend plans, and a new restaurant in Gastown. Ethan responded appropriately, laughing at the jokes, nodding in agreement, and offering well-timed comments. And yet, there was an almost imperceptible calculated quality to his presence. Every laugh, every nod, every gesture seemed rehearsed, as if he were performing normalcy rather than living it. After dinner, he excused himself to the study, citing some work I need to finish. His absence was brief, but the subtle tension remained. Claire glanced around the empty kitchen, noticing a faint, rhythmic sound, tapping. She assumed he was moving papers in his office, organizing something. The colleagues laughed off the oddity, attributing it to Ethan's meticulous nature. As the night deepened, the city outside grew quiet, and Maplewood Drive settled into its familiar hush. Streetlights flickered across manicured lawns. A neighbor walking their dog saw a figure through the Harper windows, silhouette rigid and unmoving, staring outward. The house radiated normalcy, but something unseen stirred inside, preparing, calculating. Even the small details contributed to the growing unease. The way Ethan straightened the silverware one more time than necessary, the precise alignment of chairs pushed under the table, the faint glimmer of a notebook left on the counter, all ordinary, yet unnervingly perfect. Then came the final moment of that ordinary evening, the subtle prelude to a night that would change everything. Ethan paused at the living room window, glanced out at the street, and for just a second, smiled. It was the same calm, unnerving smile that would later freeze the courtroom in disbelief. The night seemed ordinary. But behind the walls of Maplewood Drive, the stage had been set. Something unseen was about to unfold, something that would shock everyone who had ever considered Ethan a normal man. Could you have noticed the warning signs? Would you have sensed the tension behind the calm? Comment below if you think you would have noticed these subtle hints, and don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss what happens next, because the night is far from over. The morning after that seemingly ordinary evening, investigators began piecing together a series of anomalies that would soon reveal Ethan Harper's carefully concealed intentions. What initially looked like the life of a successful financial analyst and devoted boyfriend was slowly unraveling into something far more calculated and chilling. It began with phone records. Investigators noticed repeated calls and messages to seemingly innocuous numbers, hardware suppliers, courier services, and local shops in Vancouver. At first glance, they appeared routine. But closer inspection revealed the pattern. Trips to stores where specific tools were purchased, deliveries timed meticulously, and messages that weren't casual or social, they were precise instructions, encoded in a language only Ethan understood. Then came the hardware store receipts. Small purchases, each seemingly ordinary, a roll of duct tape, a box of gloves, a package of padlocks. Alone, these items could be dismissed as household needs. Together, however, they painted a picture of someone planning with methodical foresight. Investigators dug deeper into Ethan's digital life. His emails were encrypted, messages sent with coded phrases and hidden meanings. One message read, "Check the usual spot. Timing is everything." Another, "Everything aligned by Thursday. Confirm readiness." At first, the word seemed cryptic, but when combined with the hardware purchases and his meticulous daily schedule, a startling truth began to emerge. Even friends and colleagues began to reveal details in retrospect. Ethan had been meticulous in documenting minor details, car movements in the neighborhood, schedules of neighbors, patterns of foot traffic, even when his girlfriend would be out of town. To anyone else, it might have seemed obsessive or quirky. But now, investigators saw the calculated precision that suggested more than harmless eccentricity, a plan taking shape in real time. Yet here's the most unsettling part. No one close to Ethan seemed aware of the scale of his intentions. Claire, his girlfriend, thought she knew him well, his calm demeanor, his organized nature, his attention to detail. Friends admired his methodical work ethic. Neighbors only noticed small oddities. None of them had ever imagined that these minor observations were pieces of a puzzle that would soon reveal itself in a way no one could ignore. The investigators' notes reflected a growing unease. This is not random. This is methodical. Someone close to him may suspect nothing. How did he maintain such control over appearances? And then came the first major shock. An encrypted message buried deep in his emails referenced a location that wasn't his office, his home, or anywhere his friends had ever seen. A location that no one would have suspected, somewhere private, hidden, yet critical to his plan. It was the first hint that Ethan's intentions were not only deliberate but secretly orchestrated away from prying eyes. Investigators were left with more questions than answers. How could someone so ordinary plan so meticulously? And who, if anyone, had any clue about the dangerous path Ethan had charted? By the time authorities arrived at Ethan Harper's home for a routine follow-up investigation, the neighborhood was buzzing with quiet curiosity. Maplewood Drive, usually so serene, now hummed with tension. No one imagined what they were about to find. The initial walkthrough revealed nothing unusual. Everything appeared ordinary, the kitchen pristine, the study orderly, the living room immaculate. But as officers inspected more closely, a hidden trapdoor was discovered beneath a rug in the hallway leading to the basement. The discovery sent a ripple of disbelief through the team. With careful precision, they lifted the trapdoor. A narrow, dark staircase descended into the unknown. The faint smell of dust and metal greeted them as flashlights illuminated the space below. It was not just a storage area. The basement was organized, methodical, almost clinical in its arrangement. Shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound journals, each meticulously labeled with dates, codes, and cryptic symbols. Stacks of folders contained printed emails, delivery receipts, and detailed notes on people in Ethan's life, friends, colleagues, and neighbors alike. Every detail, no matter how minor, had been catalogued. Then they noticed videos, neatly stored on external drives, each labeled with timestamps and locations. The investigators paused, understanding that these weren't ordinary recordings. They weren't home videos or family moments. Each video appeared to document surveillance, planning, and methodical observation of Ethan's surroundings, some seemingly taken without the subject's knowledge. Among the files, encrypted journals stood out. The digital files required multiple layers of passwords and security protocols to access. Once opened, they revealed chilling insights into Ethan's thought process, his motivations, and his meticulous planning. Sentences were calculated, devoid of emotion, yet somehow interwoven with a quiet, almost eerie sense of satisfaction in what he had orchestrated. The more investigators examined, the clearer it became Ethan had built a world beneath the world. A private realm where every action, every plan, every observation was meticulously recorded, catalogued, and analyzed. What was most disturbing was the level of foresight. He hadn't just planned a single act, he had mapped out contingencies, backups, and alternative paths in case anything went wrong. And yet, who in his life suspected any of this? Claire, friends, colleagues, everyone assumed Ethan was ordinary, reliable, even charming. No one had any idea that beneath his calm exterior lay a labyrinth of secrets, a hidden world of planning that only he could navigate. What exactly had Ethan been hiding down here? Was this basement just a reflection of obsession, or did it contain clues to something far more sinister? Every file, every journal, every video hinted at a story that had yet to unfold, one that would shock the community and the courtroom alike. The investigators were left staring at the extent of his planning, realizing that what they had found so far might be just the tip of the iceberg. The question lingered. How much more had Ethan Harper hidden from the world, and who, if anyone, would understand the full truth? If you want to uncover the secrets hidden in Ethan Harper's basement and see how investigators piece together the chilling puzzle, subscribe, hit the like button, and share this video. Comment below where you're watching from. We read every single response, because the story is only getting darker from here. With the discovery of the basement, investigators finally had the pieces needed to begin understanding Ethan Harper's mind. The hidden journals, encrypted files, and meticulously organized videos were more than evidence. They were a window into a calculating, methodical personality unlike anything the city had encountered. The lead investigator, Detective Laura Simmons, sat at her desk late one night, reviewing hundreds of pages of notes. "This isn't impulsive," she murmured. "Every move is planned, every interaction observed, every outcome anticipated." Her partner, Detective Mark Reynolds, leaned over, noting the pattern in Ethan's emails and receipts. "He's like a chess player," he said. "Always thinking 3-4 steps ahead." Forensic psychologists were brought in to analyze Ethan's behavior. Their preliminary assessment focused on one defining characteristic: his calm, almost unnerving demeanor. The same demeanor that produced that infamous smile in court. Why did he smile? Experts suggested multiple possibilities: a sense of control over the situation, the satisfaction of having executed a plan flawlessly, or even a psychological mechanism to mask fear, guilt, or uncertainty. Whatever the reason, the smile became a psychological signature, a small yet powerful insight into how Ethan experienced the world. His meticulous habits further reinforced the profile: journals, coded messages, nightly observations, precise routines. He didn't act out of emotion or impulse. Every action was calculated, every decision intentional. Investigators began to see a man who could maintain social normalcy while planning extraordinary acts behind closed doors. But here's what troubled the team the most: Ethan's intelligence made him dangerous. He wasn't reckless or erratic, he was strategically patient, waiting for the perfect moment, aware of his surroundings, and always several steps ahead of those around him. Even the investigators found themselves second-guessing the obvious, questioning whether any observation could fully reveal his intentions. And yet, there were subtle hints in his personal life, moments when control slipped just enough to be noticeable. Claire had mentioned the late-night tapping, the constant checking of locks, the obsessive organization. Friends had described his unusual routines and peculiar observations. Alone, these behaviors might seem eccentric. Together, they painted the picture of a mind operating on a level that others couldn't easily comprehend. Detective Simmons paused on a particular journal entry, a line that chilled her: "The world sees what I allow it to see. The rest is mine alone." It was a window into his psyche, a man who carefully curated both his life and the perception others held of him. The courtroom smile was no accident. It was a calculated choice, a silent statement. "I am in control, and you don't yet understand me." And as investigators began to map the full extent of Ethan's behaviors and planning, one truth became clear: this case was far more complex than anyone could have imagined. Could anyone close to Ethan have predicted the depth of his planning? Could a man so composed and calculating be fully understood, or stopped, before his actions escalated further? The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, every bench groaning under the weight of anticipation. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Victim advocates clutched tissues, their eyes wide, bracing for the proceedings ahead. Maplewood Drive had never seen such attention, and the city of Vancouver had its collective gaze fixed on one man, Ethan Harper. Ethan sat in the defendant's chair, calm, collected, almost unnervingly so. He wore a tailored suit, his dark hair neatly combed, eyes scanning the room like a strategist observing a chessboard. He smiled faintly as the judge entered, the same smile that had haunted investigators and neighbors alike. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Around him, the air was thick with tension. The judge, Honorable Richard Carmichael, a man with decades of experience in high-profile cases, adjusted his glasses and surveyed the courtroom. The prosecutors exchanged quiet nods, reviewing notes, preparing for the meticulous presentation of evidence. Victim advocates sat with trembling hands, whispering to one another, while the defense attorney tried to maintain an air of controlled composure, aware that her client's demeanor would dominate the room. Every movement Ethan made seemed deliberate. He didn't fidget, he didn't glance nervously at the jury, and he certainly didn't betray any hint of the anxiety that would have been expected of someone facing such grave charges. He simply sat, fingers tapping lightly on the table, eyes tracking the judge's every move. As the proceedings began, prosecutors laid out the facts: meticulous planning, hidden journals, encrypted messages, and the disturbing evidence found in the basement. They painted a picture of a man who had orchestrated every detail of his actions, every contingency carefully mapped. Each word seemed to hang in the air, heavy with implication, and the room collectively held its breath. The defense attempted to reframe the narrative, challenging the psychological analysis, emphasizing Ethan's outwardly normal life, suggesting stress and subtle social pressures might have influenced behavior. But every argument they made seemed almost irrelevant against the calm certainty with which Ethan conducted himself. His presence alone overshadowed the courtroom's tension. Finally, Judge Carmichael leaned forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Mr. Harper, do you comprehend the severity of the charges against you? Do you understand the consequences of your actions?" The room went silent. Every eye turned toward Ethan. Cameras zoomed in, microphones capturing every sound. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the air itself had frozen. Would he flinch? Would he show fear, guilt, remorse? Instead, Ethan tilted his head slightly, a measured, almost playful smirk tugging at his lips. His answer was calm, deliberate, unnervingly confident. "Yes, Your Honor." "I understand." Gasps echoed throughout the gallery. The judge's brow furrowed, and the prosecutors exchanged uneasy glances. The courtroom had expected hesitation, trembling, perhaps even panic. What they got was control personified, a man unfazed by the gravity of his situation. What did that chilling smile mean? Was it arrogance, defiance, or something deeper, a secret only Ethan truly understood? The courtroom tension had reached a boiling point, and everyone knew that the next moments could shatter the fragile balance of power in that room. The courtroom held its breath as the prosecution began presenting the evidence. Each item was revealed deliberately, like pieces of a puzzle being laid on the table, and each piece added mini-suspense, drawing gasps, whispers, and tense glances from the gallery. First came the phone records. Every call, text, and message was methodically examined. Investigators pointed out repeated contacts with hardware stores, courier services, and cryptic numbers. Patterns emerged. Timestamps lining up perfectly with Ethan's movements in the days leading up to the crime. The jury leaned forward. Even the judge's eyes narrowed as the meticulous planning came into view. Next, encrypted messages were decrypted in real time. Phrases that had once seemed meaningless now revealed chilling instructions and coded observations. Each message exposed the deliberate steps Ethan had taken, monitoring schedules, securing tools, and establishing contingencies. A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was not impulsive behavior. This was premeditation, executed with precision. Then came the CCTV footage from Maplewood Drive and surrounding streets. Video clips showed Ethan moving through the neighborhood at odd hours, pausing, observing, taking notes on surroundings that no one else seemed to notice. Every subtle glance, every calculated step, painted a picture of a man always one step ahead, quietly orchestrating events while the world assumed he was ordinary. Finally, the journals were displayed. Leather-bound volumes filled with meticulous notes, diagrams, and reflections. Lines like, "Observation is control," or "Time is my ally, no one notices the moments between moments," sent shivers through the courtroom. It was the first time many realized the depth of Ethan's planning, the level of calculation that had gone unnoticed for so long. Each piece of evidence built on the previous, layer upon layer, tightening the noose of suspense. The audience watching the unfolding trial, both in court and on live broadcasts, could feel the tension rise. Every detail added to the sense of inevitability, every revelation a brushstroke in a chilling portrait of a man who had lived two lives. One ordinary, one meticulously hidden. As the final pieces were revealed, the courtroom was left with a single, pressing question: what was Ethan Harper's ultimate motive? What drove a man who could appear so normal to plan something so extraordinary? Share this video with someone who loves mysteries. You won't believe what comes next. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. The next chapter will reveal a shocking courtroom confrontation that will change everything. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the viewers were transported into Ethan Harper's past, a journey that began long before Maplewood Drive or the chilling courtroom smile. To understand the man behind the calculated exterior, one had to start at the beginning, the childhood that quietly shaped him. Ethan was born in Toronto, Canada, into a household that appeared normal on the surface. His father, a hard-working accountant, and his mother, a part-time nurse, struggled to balance work, bills, and raising a son with a mind far ahead of his years. On the outside, the family seemed typical: dinners at the table, school routines, and weekend outings. But beneath that surface were tensions, instability, and unspoken pressures that slowly mold Ethan's personality. From a young age, Ethan was observant beyond his years. He noticed details others overlooked. Subtle facial expressions, body language, and conversations whispered between adults. He learned quickly that understanding people could give him control, that observing quietly could shield him from chaos. But his intelligence, combined with emotional isolation, set the stage for a mind that was both analytical and detached. School brought no relief. Teachers praised his intellect but struggled with his detachment from peers. Friends were few, often intimidated by his intensity. At times, he seemed socially aware, capable of charm and humor. Other times, he was distant, lost in a private world of calculation and observation. Even early hobbies, puzzles, strategy games, meticulous note-taking, hinted at a growing pattern. Control and precision became a way of coping. Family life was a series of contradictions. Love was present, but so were conflicts. Arguments between his parents often escalated without resolution. Ethan's father, strict and demanding, expected flawless grades and obedience. His mother, though affectionate, was overwhelmed, leaving gaps in guidance and emotional support. The household was safe but emotionally complex, a place where a child could learn structure, but also secrecy, self-reliance, and the power of silence. By his teenage years, Ethan's duality was clear. To outsiders, he was polite, capable, and even endearing. To himself, he was calculating, recording observations, and silently cataloguing people, routines, and events. Early signs of the meticulous, strategic thinker he would become were evident: patterns of behavior, note-taking, and the subtle testing of boundaries. The flashbacks lingered on a particularly formative moment, a late-night confrontation with his father. Words exchanged were harsh, expectations rigid. Ethan, barely 15, retreated to his room, jotting notes and analyzing the conflict, seeking to understand cause, effect, and possible outcomes for the future. It wasn't rebellion, it was calculation. That night, he realized that control over information, over what others knew and what he revealed, could become a tool far more powerful than anger or fear. Yet, even in these moments, the story didn't excuse him. Viewers were drawn into a moral conflict. Empathy for a child shaped by circumstances, but unease at the seeds of calculation and detachment taking root. Could his upbringing explain his future actions? Or were some choices beyond explanation? Sometimes understanding the past doesn't explain the future, but it can give us glimpses into the decisions that define a life, and the moments that turn ordinary people into figures of infamy. As Ethan's past unfolded, the courtroom waited. Would his carefully constructed calm withstand the mounting pressure of evidence, public scrutiny, and moral judgment? The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor's voice grew low and deliberate, setting the stage for the reconstruction of the fateful night. Every word painted a picture that seemed normal at first, ordinary even, until the tension built to an almost unbearable pitch. It was a cool October evening in Vancouver, the streets slick from a light drizzle, the city lights reflecting softly on wet pavement. Ethan Harper returned home from work, carrying a briefcase and wearing his usual calm demeanor. The smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread wafted from the kitchen, where his girlfriend Claire had prepared a quiet meal. It was a night like any other, a night where routine masked the extraordinary. Ethan moved through his home with precision. He checked the locks on the doors, adjusted the thermostat, and even aligned the silverware on the table. Friends and neighbors would later describe these actions as ordinary habits, minor quirks of a meticulous man. But investigators now saw them differently, markers of control, preparation, and anticipation. He greeted Claire with a polite smile, small talk exchanged, laughter shared over dinner. Yet beneath that ordinary interaction, every micro-movement was calculated. His eye scanned the room, noting angles, exits, and even the placement of objects on counters. Every sound, every shadow, every distraction was accounted for. After dinner, Ethan excused himself, claiming he needed to work in his study. He moved with quiet precision, slipping into the room where tools, notes, and journals were meticulously stored. A soft tap of his fingers echoed in the silence, the same rhythm noted by neighbors, the subtle signature of a mind orchestrating what was to come. Minutes stretched like hours. Outside, the night deepened. Streetlights flickered, cars passed occasionally, unaware of the quiet tension building behind the Harper household doors. Ethan paused at the window, glanced at the empty street, and then returned to his preparations. Each movement deliberate, each decision measured. Inside, the house seemed ordinary, the smell of dinner lingered, clocks ticked steadily, and the hum of the city provided a faint background. But the viewer senses the undercurrent, a calm before the storm. Every ordinary detail, every subtle action, layered suspense. Then came the critical turning point. Ethan retrieved items he had carefully prepared over days, gloves, journals, and other implements stored in plain sight yet hidden in purpose. He moved with confidence, fully aware of every possible variable. Every step, every choice, executed with calculated intent. The courtroom footage and eyewitness accounts freeze on the moment before the event escalates into irreversible action. The prosecutor pauses, letting the tension linger. The audience can feel the magnitude of what is about to unfold, but the full truth remains just out of reach. The quiet streets of Maplewood Drive were no longer calm. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, glancing toward Ethan Harper's home as police vehicles came and went. What had seemed like a routine suburban neighborhood now held the weight of suspicion, fear, and disbelief. Investigators worked tirelessly, uncovering details that made the case more intricate than anyone could have imagined. Every step Ethan had taken before and after the crime was scrutinized, every movement mapped, and every interaction re-examined. Neighborhood witnesses were interviewed. Some recalled seeing Ethan walking the streets late at night, carrying bags that seemed innocuous but now raised questions. Others remembered the faint, rhythmic tapping on windows and doors, once dismissed as eccentric behavior, now understood as part of a calculated sequence. Even small details, like the placement of vehicles or the unusual arrangement of garbage bins, were recorded and added to the growing timeline of events. Forensic analysis revealed startling information. Fingerprints matched tools found in the hidden basement. Surveillance footage captured moments that had seemed mundane but, in hindsight, revealed pre-planned positioning and timing. Blood spatter analysis, timestamps from smart home devices, and digital logs from his devices all pieced together an almost cinematic reconstruction of the night. Every microsecond, every subtle action, told the story of a man who had anticipated the entire chain of events. Investigators reconstructed the timeline with chilling precision. From Ethan's movements after dinner, his time in the study, to the deliberate pacing of the house and preparation of tools, everything pointed to a man who planned each step down to the minute. Nothing had been left to chance, not the timing of neighbors' walks, not the placement of cameras, not even the expected reactions of those in his home. And yet, the question remained, why? The evidence painted a portrait of meticulous control, but motive was elusive. Friends and colleagues described Ethan as disciplined, charming, and seemingly ordinary. Claire, his girlfriend, couldn't reconcile the man she knew with the man described by investigators. The police files hinted at a complex mind, one capable of planning with surgical precision, yet hiding layers of personal history, grudges, or unresolved conflict. Investigators knew they were only scratching the surface. Every new piece of evidence added complexity, suggesting not only premeditation but a psychological game played on those around him, friends, family, and the entire neighborhood. Every clue points to a man who planned every move, but why? What drives someone to hide behind calm smiles and ordinary routines while orchestrating something so shocking? As detectives pieced together the evidence, one critical detail emerged. A connection nobody expected, linking Ethan to an event years earlier that could explain his meticulous planning. The courtroom, the city, and the viewers were left waiting for answers that promised to redefine everything they thought they knew about him. If you're on the edge of your seat wondering what that hidden connection could be, subscribe, hit the like button, and comment where you're watching from. The next chapter reveals the shocking truth that changes the game entirely. The courtroom was electric. Cameras, reporters, and spectators all focused on one man, Ethan Harper. His calm, almost unnerving smile remained plastered across his face, even as the prosecution prepared to reveal the most shocking pieces of evidence yet. Every detail was strategic, every reaction calculated, and the tension in the room was palpable. Prosecutor Alicia Trent stood, her voice steady but forceful, as she laid out a series of damning facts. She presented phone records, showing Ethan had meticulously mapped every movement of neighbors and colleagues. CCTV footage was displayed, illustrating his calculated pacing and deliberate timing on the night of the crime. Each new piece of evidence was like a hammer striking, yet Ethan smiled faintly, unflinching, a ripple of discomfort spreading across the gallery. The defense attorney attempted to counter, emphasizing Ethan's intelligence and outwardly normal life. She described his successful career as a financial analyst, his social interactions, and his relationship with Claire, attempting to frame him as a man misunderstood rather than malevolent. But with each new revelation, her words seemed to falter against the weight of the evidence. Ethan's calm demeanor created a stark contrast to the growing unease in the courtroom. Prosecutors whispered to each other, glancing at the judge, whose eyes occasionally flickered toward the smiling defendant. Victim advocates in the gallery clutched tissues, shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the defense attorney, for a brief moment, paused mid-sentence, unsure how to counteract the aura of detachment emanating from her client. The courtroom drama peaked with the presentation of an unexpected twist, a previously undisclosed piece of evidence linking Ethan to an event years earlier, one that shed light on his meticulous planning and motives. Gasps echoed throughout the room. The tension was almost unbearable. The judge leaned forward, voice firm and unwavering, asking Ethan a direct, pointed question. "Mr. Harper, do you truly understand the consequences of your actions?" For a heartbeat, everyone waited. Would he falter? Show fear? Remorse? Instead, he smiled, a calm, chilling expression that seemed to mock the very gravity of the courtroom. Each new revelation felt like a domino falling, pulling the courtroom and viewers further into the unsettling truth of who Ethan Harper really was. Every detail, every reaction, every calculated smile added to the drama. The courtroom had emptied, but the weight of the trial lingered like a heavy fog over Maplewood Drive and the city of Vancouver. Ethan Harper's calm smile remained etched in the minds of those who witnessed it, a reminder that some mysteries are never fully resolved. Even after months of investigation, questions remained unanswered. Did Ethan truly understand the consequences of his actions? Was his smile a sign of confidence, defiance, or an eerie detachment from reality? Detectives and forensic psychologists debated endlessly, their analyses revealing only fragments of a mind that was methodical, calculating, and endlessly complex. Investigators knew there were still layers to explore. Could there be more hidden journals, encrypted files, or unrevealed evidence tucked away in that basement or in places nobody had thought to look? Every unopened folder, every locked drawer hinted at secrets the world had yet to see. Even the tiniest clue could rewrite the narrative of what had truly happened that night. For the public, the story became a lens to examine human complexity. Ethan Harper's case forced people to question morality, justice, and the capacity for dual lives. How could a man live so ordinary a life by day and yet plan acts that shocked a community? Where does accountability intersect with psychology, upbringing, and circumstance? For Claire, friends, and neighbors, the answers were partial and unsatisfying. Each person wrestled with their own interpretation, each carrying fragments of unease, confusion, and grief. And for the viewers, the story resonated on a deeper level. A reminder that sometimes the world's darkest chapters unfold behind familiar faces and ordinary routines. The final courtroom images lingered: Ethan's calm, unwavering smile, the judge's solemn gaze, the prosecution team's exhaustion, and the whispered questions of victim advocates. All of it became a psychological imprint, a story that would haunt anyone who witnessed it. Could someone like Ethan exist next door? Could his calm smile hide a world of secrets? And even with all evidence laid bare, is justice ever fully understood? If you want the next part of this shocking story, subscribe, like, and share. Let us know where you're watching from. We'll read every comment. Engage with us, because your thoughts on morality, justice, and human complexity matter. What would you have done if you were in the courtroom? The conversation doesn't end here, it's only beginning.